Hello, everyone. Thanks so much for joining us again at the American Aboriginals YouTube channel. Appreciate it. And today we're going to be doing a short video on a question that I've been definitely wanting to explore for some time now, called What's Your American Roots? Now, the reason why this is a central question is because there's been a lot of talk about who we are as American Aboriginals. What do we call ourselves? Who are we? Where are we from? All of those specific and detailed questions that many of us are still actually exploring as we do our genealogy and as we start to really think about who we are as a people and who have been on this planet for a very, very long time. Now, one of the things I wanted to kind of frame here is the different types of classifications that the quote unquote US government has been calling the different indigenous tribes. And since the 1800s, we've been called Indian, Mulatto, Negro, Colored, African American, and Black. And when you really look at these classifications, they keep changing. And of course, there were many different reasons for those changes. There's political reasons, there's social changes. There's so much that goes into why we keep being reclassified. And I mean, that's a whole nother video in itself, but I just really wanted to kind of break down all these different classifications that we've had. Now, many of you know this. You've probably seen this in your own research and you have your own conclusions as to why this is happening. But I wanted to at least start with the official classifications as we have been defined by the US government. Now, since then, we have been calling ourselves different things in this space. And it's really important to really kind of break down what that means for each of us. And again, it's a personal identification for each and every one of you. And you self-identify based on what you feel, based on what you know, based on what resonates with you. And what we are calling ourselves now, again, varies. As you can see, we're calling ourselves Indian, African American, Black, foundational Black Americans, American descendants of slaves, Aboriginal, Indigenous, Moors. And so as you can see, we still, within this framework of being in this country, are still redefining who we are. And again, like I stated, it's definitely a personal, and it's a personal journey for everyone. And I don't necessarily want to criticize anyone for what they want to call themselves. But I'm going to go a little further into this, is that what's the land or country that your family is tied to? Now, I think this is really, really important, particularly as we move deeper into looking at our roots as Indigenous and Aboriginal people. Again, as you can see, I prefer the term Aboriginal because there's really nothing that predates the original man. Well, there is, but that's another topic altogether. But as we start to talk about this dynamic called reparations, and you are probably seeing this come up in the news a great deal, particularly in the state of California, you will probably see that there's now a review of what reparations might look like for those who identify with being Black or African American in the state of California. So I really, you guys do some Googling on that and read up on that and see what that looks like for those who are in the state of California. So, but I'm going to go back to this whole concept of the land or country that your family is tied to. And most importantly, what can be proven? Because a lot of times we talk so much about, well, my family's owed this and we're owed this and what about this? And I think it's so important that we start looking at things from not just from a personal standpoint or emotional place, but also what can be legally proven. And the reason why I'm saying that is because I really want to start having that discussion around legality and law, because I think if we don't operate from that space, we're going to constantly find ourselves, going in this circular kind of motion about who we are, what's owed to us, without really having any kind of factual framework. Now, as you can see, from one of the various maps I have, when you talk about the Aboriginal, he is from all over the US, right? Or I guess you can say the continent of North America. And the reason why I start with this is because even if you say to yourself, I am the descendant of African slaves, because that is what I've researched, or that is probably what I've learned or heard somewhere, whether it be in school, whether it be from my ancestors, we still have an incredible amount of history that we can explore right here that can be proven. And as you know, when you talk about intermixing and all the different tribes, we are from this land for sure. We definitely have roots in this land. So this is just one map that kind of details a bit how we were spread out, and there's tons of these maps, and you can find these on your own, and they will probably look different based on the year that you've obtained them, right? But I just wanted to show you this particular map so that you understood that from an Aboriginal and Indigenous space, there are so many different types of tribes. We would call different names, and some of our names were changed as well. You will probably see, Miami, Illinois, Iowa, Kickapoo. You'll see all of the names that we have been called, right? So, and to put things into perspective, I want to also go back to, again, looking at history to really talk about what happened to some of us, or I should say a great deal of us who identify with being Aboriginal and Indigenous. And even if you're not sure, your family is probably in this mix somewhere, somehow. So I really want you guys to, study the Indian Removal Act of 1830. And this is where, U.S. President Andrew Jackson basically signed into law to remove the Indians or the Aboriginal people of their lands and have them move west of the Mississippi. Now, I won't go into a lot of the dynamics of this particular act, but essentially, for all intents and purposes, this was just a way to make room for the colonists and people who were coming here to this country. Now, when it came to the Indian Removal Act, this act continued on with Martin Van Buren, who was Jackson's successor. And the reign of terror in this particular act was incredible. And again, that's a whole nother video. But approximately, at least according to history, it says that about 60,000 indigenous people from at least 18 tribes were relocated to the territory of Oklahoma and what we now know to be the Trail of Tears. So again, that's a whole nother video, but I wanted to put some context here in terms of how this relates to being tied to the land, because again, many of us, as we go through our own genealogical research, will find that we are indeed Aboriginal and Indigenous to this particular land. So when you look at the map of where we were all forced from, you will see that it's a pretty wide space. For those of you who have lived in the South or have ever visited the South, you know that it's pretty all-encompassing when it comes to seeing where we are and what we've been, and all of the cities and states that encompass the area called the Southeast. And as you can see, there were a whole lot of people taken from very specific areas and basically told, go here, just go right here, right? So let that sit for a little bit, because to me, I have so many strong feelings about it, but again, I can't go into it right here because it'll be just too lengthy of a video. But the government wasn't done in the removal of the Aboriginal people. They still continued the onslaught by destroying many towns. And this is just, again, a portion of the towns that were burnt down, that were destroyed, that were, again, we were driven out of these particular spaces because many of us in our ancestors did not leave. We stayed where we were, we stayed put, we continued to live and go about our lives and continue to have children and families and set up our own towns. And I know many people know of the destruction of Tulsa, Oklahoma. But again, when you look at this map in particular, there are many Tulsas, and they happened even prior to the 1921 massacre. And as you can see, it was constant. It was constant. So when we talk about compensation, right, for our ancestors' lands, what are we really talking about when we talk about reparations? Well, for many of us, sometimes just writing a check is enough. And in the case of what the government is looking at in California, they are looking at compensating many of the blacks of African Americans upwards of $230,000. Hey, for some people, almost $250,000 looks pretty good on paper. But when you talk about our towns and you talk about the destruction of our communities and how we lived on a daily basis, I don't necessarily think $250,000 is enough. So when we talk about compensation for our ancestors' lands, the monetary compensation, like I said, is astronomical. And to put it in perspective, the U.S. government is $31 trillion in debt. And it's growing every day. It's growing every day. So it'd be very, very challenging. I won't even say challenging. It'd be almost impossible to write a check to the nearly, I don't know how many million of us that we consider ourselves to be Aboriginal to be, but it's upwards of the millions, right? And I don't think anyone's going to be writing us checks anytime soon. Plus, I think it's really important to understand the legality of that, and is that even legal for them to do so? So you must first establish the land that your family is tied to. Even before you start talking about the money, let's talk again about the land, right? And I'm going to keep stressing that because I know that for some of us, when we talk about, I'm the descendant of an African slave, okay, but can you go back to Africa and claim any of those lands? More than likely not. But you can definitely prove who your people are here in this country. And I really want that to be stressed because sometimes, people mock us. When I say us, I mean they mock the people who are now identifying themselves as Indigenous and Aboriginal and saying, you just want to be Native American. You just want to be Indian. When it's not really about wanting to be anything. It is about proving who you are. I don't have to prove that I'm Aboriginal to the land. I do have to prove it, but I don't have to prove that to anyone that doesn't know anything about my family or my family tree. I know it to be a fact. I have the records to prove it. And that's really all that you really need to do. But I think it's really, really important when you start having conversations around this discussion about reparations that you really get very specific about that. Right? So again, you guys know that I'm always going to focus on genealogy and obtaining your family's records, because that is really going to really show you on paper and historically where you fit into this landscape. right? Because anyone can tell you who you are, right? Anyone can pull out some books and say, oh, this is who you are. But only you know that. And this is going to be the foundation, and it will serve as legal evidence, not just, feelings and this is what my mother told me or my grandmother told me, which is all important. All of it is a starting point. But from a legal perspective, how can you prove it? I mean, you wouldn't go into the courtroom and say, Judge, I feel that I'm owed this money. The feelings are not relevant. It's what you can prove. And that's why I really want many of us to start coming from that perspective. Come from the perspective of what you can prove, not what someone is telling you. There's a lot of people out there that are trying to discount who we are. But there's too many folks out here who are getting really smart about it. So, but if you're still in doubt and you feel like doing your genealogy is a little overwhelming, that's okay, because everyone is going to get to it in their own way. But I think it's really, really important that you start this journey, and you start this journey as soon as possible, because it is going to take some time, and you may be digging for years on this one. Okay. But here are some books that that have been really, really helpful for me in terms of really understanding the history, really understanding what was not taught to us in public schools, and even in college, for that matter. So really, look at some of these books, and you'll get some perspective here, right? And here's another set of books that really helped me on my journey. But it was only the beginning. And I really want to really place special emphasis on When the World Was Black, because this is going to really say to you, you know what? I don't really have to prove my Aboriginal status, because guess what? The whole world was Aboriginal, is Aboriginal. Right? Other folks are just catching up to us, but we know what's been happening and how the history has been altered. But that's, again, another video. But again, you guys, I just wanted to have this discussion around, the conversation of being tied to the land, because I think that is really what we need to be talking about. We can talk all day about what we call ourselves, and I think it's, again, very important that the tribes that you are part of, your genealogy, all of this stuff. That's important to having real conversations. But you also have to remember that you're tied to somewhere. You're not just, an entity that came over on a boat. And even if you did come over, your ancestors did come over forcibly on a boat, there's still ties to this country. So, in any case, I hope this was a helpful video and it sets you on a path of discovery and awareness. And I will be talking to you very soon. Thank you so much.